Let us pray. Our Father, we thank you for your abundant blessings to our province and ourselves. We ask you to ensure to us your guidance and the will to follow it. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill PR 8, the Edmonton Economic Development Authority Amendment Act 1987. The purpose of this bill is to make certain changes in the membership of the authority.
The honourable member for Stony Plain has moved first reading of Bill PR 8, Edmonton Economic Development Authority Amendment Act 1987. All those wishing to give assent to first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill PR 8, being Edmonton Economic Development Authority Amendment Act 1987, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Herron, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, I request the opportunity to file with the House copies of a news release which went out this morning on behalf of the government explaining the adjustment on the 5% hotel tax.
Introduction of special guests.
Minister of Culture.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly today 5 leaders of ethno-cultural communities in the Edmonton area. They are seated in the Members' Gallery, and they are Mr. Chin Long Hak, President of the Canadian-Cambodian Friendship Society of Edmonton and area, Ms. Helen Nielsen, President of the Danish-Canadian Friendship Club, Mrs. Dolores Sorensen, President of the Mexican-Canadian Association of Edmonton, Mr. Sudi Koka-Oglu, President of the Turkish-Canadian Society, and Mr. Mike Lancaster, President of the Edmonton Caribbean Cultural Association. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I would ask them to rise and receive the thanks of the Assembly for their contribution to Alberta and for being here today.
Mr. Anderson.
Mr.
Speaker.
Speaker,
Advanced Education.
today I'd like to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly 10 representatives of the community consortia from around Alberta. This is a rather unique voluntary association which assesses the needs of communities and develops programs of credit courses in the post-secondary education system for Albertans in communities throughout Alberta. They're seated in the Members' Gallery, and I'll ask them to rise as I introduce them. They're Dr. Dan Cornish and Mr. Jim Ramsbottom from the Big Country Consortium, Les Talbot and Mrs. Barbara Townsend representing the Chinook Consortium, Dave Van Temelen and Jim Peacock representing the North Peace Consortium, Dr. Michael Andrews and Mr. Alan Day representing the Pembina Consortium, and Mrs. Joanne Allen and Mr. Rick Armstrong representing the Yellowhead Consortium. I'd ask them to stand.
Minister of Career Development and Employment.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of my honourable colleague and benchmate, Nancy Bitkowski, MLA for Edmonton-Glenora, gives me great pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly 12 grade 9 students from the Stratford Junior High School and their teacher, Dory Waladko. I ask that members accord to them the usual welcome of this Assembly.
Red Deer North.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to introduce to you today 37 bright and energetic students from grades 5 and 6 of the Fairview School on the sunny side of the city in Red Deer North. They're accompanied by 2 of their teachers, Mr. Atkinson, Mr. McDougall, and 3 parents, Mrs. Heafy, Mrs. Jones, and Mrs. DeVore. They're seated in the public gallery, and I'd ask them to stand and receive the warm welcome of this House.
Red Deer South.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure for me to introduce to you and through you to members of the Legislative Assembly 36 top grade 6 students from the Eastview Community School. I might note, Mr. Speaker, that I had the pleasure of attending that school as a student not that many years ago. I would ask... It seems like yesterday, Mr. Speaker.
Tell us about it.
I would note that they are joined by their teacher, Mrs. Sandra Goheen, and 2 parents, Mrs. Barker and Mrs. Cosette. I would ask that they stand and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Minister of Hospitals and Medicare. Mr. Speaker, the Minister tells us that we're spending too much on health care, and then in the next breath he announced that he would spend 70,000 health care dollars on mailing a propaganda message conveying his side of the story on Medicare cuts. Mr. Speaker, how does the Minister justify this obscene waste of taxpayers' money for propaganda reasons at the same time he is cutting services?
Mr. Speaker, what we are doing with respect to yesterday's announcement on the health care insurance plan modifications, which will come into effect August 1st, is trying to make sure that all Albertans are aware well in advance of actually what is being proposed. In that regard, using the facilities at the health care insurance plan offices, we are sending a one-page information brochure to all Alberta families. It contains on the front side of it a letter from myself to all Albertans that outlines, generally speaking, what is being proposed, and on the back side is a fact sheet with more information. Far from being a propaganda sheet, Mr. Speaker, this is an important piece of information that all Albertans need to have so they know what health care insurance plan does cover. And I make absolutely no apologies, Mr. Speaker, for communicating to Albertans the facts of the Alberta Health Care Insurance Plan and the changes that have been made. I think that's not only appropriate but responsible for us to do that.
Hear, hear.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Albertans are well aware of what this government is doing. You don't need to spend $70,000 to put into those cuts, Mr. Speaker. Right. But also, I noticed last night that the minister has another propaganda machine, only this one's going on television. And this one is strictly political, Mr. Speaker. It's strictly political. My question is, will the minister advise whether these ads are coming out of health care dollars, and how much are we paying for them?
Well, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is entirely behind the times. First of all, I might say that expecting that all Albertans would be aware through the news media of the exact changes that had occurred. Yesterday afternoon in the question period, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, after having read the news release, still didn't understand the changes that had been made. It would hardly be expected that the headlines in the Edmonton Journal would provide Albertans with all of the information they need. So it's important that this kind of information go out, and it will continue to go out as part of the responsible actions that we take to inform Albertans about the health care insurance plan. As for the other program, which I spoke about in this House at length, including during the estimates of the Department of Hospitals and Medical Care, that program is aimed at trying to provide information to Albertans about the cost of the medical care and hospital plan and medical services in this province. It's also aimed at trying to instill in Albertans some attitudes about better health habits than they presently have. It's a trial program that runs for some 8 weeks, after which an assessment will be made, Mr. Speaker, as to whether or not it's effective to utilize those kinds of funds on that kind of an information campaign. $200,000 spent on information to Albertans in that regard out of a $900 million budget could hardly be called excessive. I think it is it's responsible for us to consider very effectively the ways in which we might better communicate to Albertans, and the Honourable Minister of Community Occupational Health and I will be working together to try to develop new ways in which we can communicate to Albertans the importance of good health care.
Mr. Speaker, sure they'll be working together to see what else they can do to Albertans in the health care system. But this minister is saying that, oh, well, we have thousands of dollars to spend on advertising, and I would suggest most of it is propaganda, but we don't, we have at the same time have to cut back on the actual services that we're providing. Is the minister saying that he's prepared to justify this to Albertans? At this time, we can spend $270,000. At the same time, we're telling people that they can't go to the optometrist for a yearly checkup. What kind of nonsense is that?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition obviously has not yet had an opportunity to review the brochure that's going to every family in this province. On the back side of it is a fact sheet. It begins with changes to benefits effective August 1st, 1987. Deals with physical therapy benefits, chiropractic benefits, podiatry benefits, dental benefits. Deals with a host of other items that we announced yesterday. It deals with senior citizens no longer having to get a medical for a driver's license at age 70, and so on. If that's propaganda, I'm amazed at the Honourable Leader for not having read and understood the document. It's basic information that every Albertan is entitled to have. And it hasn't even got the Progressive Conservative logo on it. It's in blue. I tried to get blaze orange into it, but they said it would cost more money, so we sent it out in just blue. And it's a very good message that all Albertans certainly need.
You're getting worse, Marvin.
This minister may have the backbenchers pounding as he wastes his taxpayers' money, and say that isn't propaganda to say that even with these changes, Alberta will provide more funding for health care than any other province, and will have the most comprehensive health care system in Canada. That's not propaganda. What is it? What is it, Mr. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, the reason that the paragraph, the sentence that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition read, which is at the conclusion of the letter, is highlighted in capital letters, because that is indeed true. Even with these changes, Alberta will provide more funding for health care than any other province, and will have the most comprehensive health care system in Canada.
Calgary Northwest, followed by Edmonton Gold Bar.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care, can the Minister tell us how much money the Department hopes to be able to save by this awareness program directed both at the providers and the users of the system?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the current increase in utilization of the health care insurance plan is about 8% above population growth in this province, or above any increase in fees, because there were none provided this year. I'm hopeful that the combination of the adjustments we announced yesterday, plus more careful use of the health care plan and hospital services by our citizens and by the medical profession, will result in another saving of about $25 million. Surely it's incumbent upon us to make sure that our citizens are aware of the cost of Medicare, aware of how fast it's rising, and allow them the opportunity to see if there isn't some way that they can control the increase more effectively, perhaps, than us putting a cap on physician services or some of the other things that have been done in other parts of Canada to control the rapidly rising costs of health care. As I said, Mr. Speaker, in this legislature during my estimates, at the present rate of growth, by the year 2000, 60% of the provincial budget will go in health care. It's absolutely irresponsible for anybody to suggest we should just sit and let that happen, when there are opportunities now to let Albertans help themselves and help their government to control these costs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How, perhaps the minister would run by again, how is the minister going to measure the impact of this expensive TV program, a pale imitation, I might say, of the ADAC program? Not how many people have watched it, but what the impact is, whether it really does have any effect on the cost of health care.
Mr. Speaker, that's an extremely important question, and I'm glad that it was asked, because part of the criteria that was given to, I believe, 5 advertising agencies which competed for this particular program was an appropriate and thorough evaluation of the results of the program after the 8-week running. And so the advertising agency is committed to doing surveys of our citizens to see who in fact did see the advertising, what impact it had on their attitudes and their thoughts, and whether or not they believed that it was a useful thing to be doing. So we expect to get some very comprehensive results from the advertising agency as part of the contract that they signed when they developed the advertising program.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the second question to the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs. Mr. Speaker, the use of age, sex, and marital status as so-called rating factors in auto insurance is repugnant to most Albertans. And it's also unfair to those who are stereotyped and penalized financially for the sake of the private insurance industry. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, in 1985, the Conservative government provided a reprieve for the auto insurance industry, allowing them authority under the Individual Rights Protection Act to discriminate on the basis of sex, not age or marital status. This reprieve, as I understand, expires July the 1st, 1987. My question to the Minister, has the Minister decided that to extend this license to discriminate unfairly in the provision of auto insurance rate beyond the July 1st deadline?
Mr. Speaker, I have a personal campaign which is an attempt to remove the word sex from this context and to introduce the word gender. Sex is something we do and gender is something we have, and I might just take this opportunity to encourage others to adopt that phrase.
We didn't answer the question, Elaine.
To the person of the opposite gender over there, I wish he would have answered the question. And the question specifically is that this comes up on July the 1st, 1987. Is it this government's intention to extend that deadline?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Well, Mr. Speaker, then just to follow up on that, then the Minister is saying that, that this discrimination then is going to stop on July the 1st, and that the insurance companies will no longer be able to discriminate on the basis of gender.
Mr. Speaker, the Individual Rights Protection Act, which is the act that governs the case, has a section in it which permits discrimination when it is justifiable. And it would be my view that the rating system that is now in use by insurance companies in Alberta is indeed justifiable.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's always interesting to see who this government stands up for, isn't it? Mr. Speaker, very interesting. So the Minister is saying that I believe it's under Section 11.1 of the Individual Rights Protection Act, that she is now prepared to say that the companies, insurance companies, have a private blank check to discriminate as long as they want against young male drivers. Is that what she's saying?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's a court in Ontario which has indeed said that very thing, and I did mention that on Friday. But I would like to say this. The male drivers under the age of 25 indeed do have more accidents. According to the statistics, the Alberta collision statistics, which I believe are prepared by the Department of Transportation. Not only that, the claims, the cost of claims for those drivers in accidents are higher than for other classes of people in Alberta. So again, I say, I am speaking for all Albertans and not just one small class of, pardon me, of Albertans when I insist that the insurance company's rating system is a justifiable one according to the Individual Rights Protection Act.
Next question, Leader of the Opposition. Or is this a supplementary? I'm sorry. No. The last question is gone, Leader of the Opposition. All 3 supplementaries are gone.
Mr. Speaker,
Sorry,
just to
sorry, honourable member, they're gone. My confusion. I was so amazed not to see Westlock Sturgeon up on a supplementary that I was confused. Is this a supplementary? Thank you.
Speaker, I was so amazed that he didn't as his 4th question. I know the minister, if I may make a supplementary, refers to the boys or men getting a higher, or under 25, a higher fee because of more accidents. Yet in Medicare premiums, I'm sure that women are charged the same as men, and yet they get pregnant more often than men do. So if we go on a bit further on a question of what the causes are and what the assessment on how we want to fix fees, could the minister tell the House whether she has investigated or whether the minister has investigated the whole area of no-fault insurance and what that would do if we adopted that system, which is now under study in Ontario?
I am, of course, watching the developments in Ontario, but I do think that the no-fault insurance could very well lead to a higher cost to all Albertans, and until I am convinced of otherwise, I would hesitate to introduce it.
Thank you. Member for Red Deer North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the minister. Can the minister tell us if we were to adopt the Liberal Socialist suggestion of equalizing rates in total disregard of statistics, would women wind up paying a higher rate for the poor driving record of men?
It is true that young women have a distinct advantage because, of course, of their superior behavior on the roads.
Final supplementary on this interesting topic, Clover.
Supplementary question. The minister, in the minister's study of insurance rates, has the minister looked at making, say, the first $450 non-insurable to lower premium rates?
That is a suggestion that I have not specifically considered, but I would take it under advisement.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to designate my first question to the honourable member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are to... Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
A woman driver.
To the Minister of Hospitals and Health Care. Mr. Speaker, like many Albertans, I'm experiencing a sense of frustration, if not outrage, at the impact of the minister's cuts to health care system, the system in general, and yesterday to the fee schedule. The cuts to contraceptive counseling, family planning, will be harmful to women and families in this province, and particularly, I submit, to young women. I'd like to ask the minister, since the Alberta Medical Association has been critical of the minister's decision to de-insure contraceptive counseling, can the minister indicate if any group, providers of health care, consumers of health care, if any group has in fact supported this change, other than those noted medical experts in the Tory caucus?
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, the only group that this particular change was discussed with before the announcement was with the Alberta Medical Association. I discussed all of these fee schedule items that are being removed unless medically required with that organization. It should be noted that there are a good number of provinces who don't provide a special fee schedule for contraceptive counseling. I indicated yesterday when I announced this at a news conference that we would indeed expect medical doctors in this province to continue to provide contraceptive counseling when they do annual medical checkups, during the course of visits during pregnancies, during the course of visits by women, and a number of other fee categories. The problem that we were having in this regard is that there was some considerable abuse of the ability to bill a separate fee for contraceptive counseling in addition to a general office visit or some other type of a visit. So we're not suggesting that doctors should not be providing contraceptive counseling. Indeed, they should be as a matter of routine. and they should be providing it at the same time as they provide other health care services under other fee schedules, namely the annual checkup and also the visits that occur during a pregnancy. It should also be noted for the honourable member that I think one could expect that a great deal of contraceptive counselling and sex education should be provided at the family level first. Certainly there are any number of programs available in our education system as well. There are some family planning clinics in several areas of the province, and many of the health units do in fact provide these kinds of services. So we're not talking about doing away with contraceptive counseling in any way, shape, or form. We're talking about eliminating a special fee code that was being charged by medical doctors. Bear in mind that the Alberta Medical Association is an organization dedicated largely to ensuring that they have adequate fees for their services and doesn't, in fact, reflect the views of the College of Physicians and Surgeons.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to have the minister's comments reinforced that we're not disallowing it. Of course, there's no money saved here then. That's pretty evident. It seems it might have been prudent to consult some of the other providers. Given Alberta's inordinately high teenage pregnancy rate, will the minister agree that to de-ensure this kind of counselling, in spite of how the message is received and by whom, that it'll guarantee an even higher pregnancy rate and a potentially higher abortion rate?
No, I would not agree to that at all. In fact, first of all, Mr. Speaker, we're not, the honourable member suggests we're not talking about saving any money. Indeed we are, because what's happening now is some physicians are billing for a general office visit or they're billing a complete fee for a pregnancy, and then billing on top of that for contraceptive counseling. And in our view, that is the kind of information that should be provided as a matter of routine during the course of an annual checkup or during the course of a pregnancy. Those are only two examples. So we're talking about saving money indeed, because physicians will no longer be able to call people back and bill extra under this particular fee code. In terms of teenage pregnancies, it's certainly my view that our money, in order to ascertain that teenagers have good information and have some moral and other kinds of counseling, is better spent in other areas than paying very high-paid professionals like medical doctors to dispense that kind of information. The honourable member would likely know that a great number, a high percentage of teenage girls in particular, are very reluctant to go to the family doctor for this kind of information. And if the honourable member has discussed this matter with young people, she would know that that is the case. I am hopeful that working with the Minister of Community and Occupational Health and with other volunteer agencies throughout the province, that we can indeed, over the course of the next few months, improve the family planning counseling and information that's provided through our education system and through other community organizations.
Mr. Speaker, has the minister considered in this whole spectrum the plight of women in rural areas where public health units or other agencies may be inaccessible? Would the minister agree that these women are going to be placed in an even worse position than women in urban areas?
Not at all, Mr. Speaker. I don't regard the plight of women in rural areas to be any more difficult than the plight of women in urban areas. Certainly, those of us who live in rural Alberta have high respect for and regard for the fact that there ought to be families involved and parents involved in this particular area. I think there's a greater degree of family awareness perhaps in a lot of rural communities than might exist, particularly in the inner city where many people are indeed alone and don't have anyone to turn to. The situation is often quite different in rural communities. So I don't believe that we've done anything here that makes it much more difficult for rural women as opposed to urban women. Indeed, I believe that this kind of information can be provided extremely well to rural women by visits to their doctor for regular checkups, or indeed through, in some cases, community organizations and the health unit nurses who work regularly in areas that I represent.
Mr. Speaker, we may like to think so. Unfortunately, that's not really the way it works. Will the minister continue his personal crusade to de-ensure legal abortion procedures as well, or does he realize that this is an even more unacceptable notion than what he gave us yesterday?
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, I resent very much the honourable member's suggestion that I have a personal crusade. I think those kind of remarks are not appropriate for the question period or any other particular time during the legislature. I think what is important is to recognize that all of us, the honourable member and myself included, has some responsibilities to ensure that we do our best to provide the kind of family planning information and advice, particularly to women in this province, that will reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies. To suggest that I believe the system or the problem can be resolved by some crusade is certainly not appropriate. I think in terms of the entire situation regarding abortion over the course of the 11 months past that I've been Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care, I've dealt very fairly with all sides of that issue and tried very hard to come to some resolutions of some very difficult problems. And indeed, we were able to end the extra billing and the extra charges that were being suffered by many women in this province, and we did it, I think, in a very effective way.
Member for Edmonton Centre, supplementary.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the Minister yesterday in his announcement and today again has said that a number of health agencies provide contraceptive counseling in the community, when in fact only 7 out of 27 local health units have anything remotely resembling family planning counseling. Does the Minister of Community Health support the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care and the de-insurance of counseling by medical professionals? Does he not agree that reproductive care and family planning generally is in a mess in the community setting?
No, Mr. Speaker, I clearly do not. And I must correct the honourable member's statistics, his numbers. They are, as usual, inaccurate. There are some 11 of 27 health units in the province, an increase of 3 in this new fiscal year. And we will work with those 11 health units, in addition to the 16 others, in addition to the various birth control and family planning organizations funded through the Family and Community Support Services program. In addition, we'll continue to work with the very positive new curriculum that the Minister of Education has put in place in junior and senior high schools this year and over the next couple of years. And as well, Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to work with all those health units to, now that we know, and we see the statistics clearly, that they're alarming statistics with respect to teenage pregnancy, and come up with better ways. But we have the programs in place, and we're going to be seeking to improve them in the days ahead.
Member for Little Bowl, followed by the member for Calgary-McCall.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Hospitals as well. Some of the services will not be covered by Medicare after August the 1st, such as birth control counseling, contraceptive operations, and general eye examinations. Could the Minister indicate what discussions took place with the Alberta Medical Association to ensure and assure us that the fees for those particular services will not be higher than they are currently under the Medicare fee schedule now present?
Mr. Speaker, I've only expressed to the Alberta Medical Association that it would be our hope that doctors would respect the need to charge for their services in this area at a rate that would not exceed the fee schedule that had previously been provided. I would expect as well that there would be many times when, if a doctor feels strongly that these services need to be provided and the patient is without means, that they would consider that as well and consider their professional code of ethics. I might add, just in concluding, that the real control over whether or not there will be excessive fees charged here rests with the College of Physicians and Surgeons. And that is the watchdog, if you like, or the body which disciplines the medical profession. And if a practitioner is found to be charging in excess for his services, certain reprimands come from the College of Physicians and Surgeons, and that's a very important thing for Albertans to be aware of.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister, could the Minister indicate what steps would be taken if incidences such as this occur at the point after August the 1st? other than notifying the college to take steps? Are there other steps planned by the minister?
No, that would be the appropriate procedure. I regularly advise people who write or call my office regarding doctors' fees, because there's other fee schedules that have never been included in the healthcare insurance plan, that they should write to the registrar of the College of Physicians and Surgeons, Dr. Roy Lariche, and outline the details of the particular incident, and action will be taken by that body. And I'm confident, Mr. Speaker, that the College of Physicians and Surgeons does indeed do an excellent job of controlling problems with excessive charges.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the minister. In terms of the services I listed, has there been any feasibility studies, or is there any consideration being given by the government to initiate private insurance coverage for those specific areas by the government? And if so, would this require enabling legislation by this legislature?
No, Mr. Speaker, we've not given any special consideration to the provision of private insurance coverage for the areas that have been de-insured, and there's a very good reason why. It's not generally accepted that insurance should be covered for something whose cost is small and regular and predetermined beforehand. For example, I've been asked if we would make sure that private insurance was available for standard eye examinations. One would expect, if standard eye examinations are $30 a year, that if you bought insurance to cover them, that it would probably be $40 a year. And once you think about it for a moment, you wouldn't really buy insurance to cover something that's predictable and low in cost in that regard. The same holds true for a number of other items in that fee schedule. You would hardly think of buying insurance, I don't think, for something like premarital examinations and counseling. You know, those are the kinds of things that only occur perhaps once in a lifetime. So insurance industry would not really be all that excited about trying to provide the coverage either.
Supplementary, Lethbridge West, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Honourable Minister with regard to the member for Little Bow's question. Inasmuch as the Blue Cross system in Alberta is essentially operated by the government through the heavy subscriptions paid for senior citizens, has the minister considered requesting Blue Cross of Alberta to amend its plan in such a manner that perhaps some of these charges that now will be going directly to the patient could be included under the Alberta Blue Cross program?
Mr. Speaker, a very good question. The only area that I have discussed with Blue Cross is the provision of insurance coverage that could be paid for by senior citizens to cover the cost of private accommodation in a hospital when it's not medically required. And Blue Cross has advised that they would consider the possibility of including that with the Blue Cross package as an extra benefit that would be paid for at whatever cost there was. There again, if one considers it, it would be doubtful if the demand would be very high from seniors to pay a special premium for the provision of a private room when it's not medically required. I would think that most of them would look at the cost of the insurance and suggest that it probably wasn't something that they needed.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the minister, I'm a bit puzzled on how he expects to save money on optometric exams, because my understanding is that a medical doctor, if he refers the patient to optometrist, ophthalmologist for an eye examination because of health reasons or headaches or whatever it is, then it is covered by the plan. It is not extra if it's referred by a doctor. Wasn't that, in effect, make the plan more costly than going directly to the optometrist without going through the doctor?
No, that's an important question in it. That whole area of referrals by general practitioners and medical doctors to ophthalmologists who specialize in eye care can be a bit confusing. The Alberta Healthcare Insurance Plan will continue to pay for referrals from medical doctors, general practitioners to ophthalmologists for other than standard eye examinations for the purpose of prescribing eyeglasses or contact lenses. Most often when a physician refers a patient to an ophthalmologist, it's because the physician believes there is some problems with respect to the eyes in terms of some eye disease or some other problem that needs specialist attention. If the ophthalmologist merely does a standard eye examination, standard eye refraction, and provides a prescription, then the patient would be required to pay. But patients will all be covered for the work done by ophthalmologists, which is a major portion of an ophthalmologist's work relating to diseases and treatment of the eye for other than just standard vision.
Member for Calgary-McCall, followed by Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, recognizing the fact that Alberta is a land of opportunity and certainly a land of entrepreneurial confidence, unlike the socialist gloom and doomers over here. Mr. Speaker, I understand that the bond issue that was placed out yesterday has started to be taken up, and I wonder if the provincial treasurer could indicate what level of support Albertans have shown after the first day of purchase for the Alberta bond issue.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate an opportunity to report to the Legislative Assembly and to all Albertans of a significant success story which took place in the last week and, more importantly, yesterday. Already yesterday, Mr. Speaker, over $270 million worth of Alberta capital bonds have been fully subscribed. Mr. Speaker, we were overwhelmed by the response. I think, as the member from McCall has pointed out, it shows a clear vision of the future of this province, and the people of Alberta are willing to back that position with money.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary. Could the Treasurer indicate if there will be any limitations to the financial institutions as to the quantity of bonds they sell, given the $50,000 maximum per purchaser? In other words, are they on a quota system?
Mr. Speaker, I've been in touch with those people in the securities business who have been selling these bonds for us right across the province, and my department has been doing the same thing. What we have found, Mr. Speaker, and we were not quite prepared for the immediate response, is that there have been some disappointed Albertans to date who have not been able to fully subscribe to these bonds. It will be our position, Mr. Speaker, after reviewing the numbers again today and tomorrow, that we would not want to curtail the opportunity for individual Albertans to invest in these bonds. But it may well be, Mr. Speaker, that we may have to soften or reduce the demand for the corporate side. So, Mr. Speaker, what we're saying is that with the existing successes we have had and the response which still remains in the public's mind, we would like to have all Albertans, individual Albertans, participate, and therefore we will not curtail the sale of these bonds today.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. What then is the provincial treasurer's best estimate of the amount of bonds that may be purchased over the 2-week purchase period at this point in time?
Again, Mr. Speaker, that's a difficult one to guess. I would not expect that the current amazing response to the bond offer will continue past the first week, but it may, Mr. Speaker. I can't say it wouldn't. But we will, Mr. Speaker, expect that this interest rate and the fact that the bonds are backed by the guarantee of the province, and in fact our investments in the future of this province, universities, hospitals, and nursing homes, for example, that there will be a very significant continuous demand for these bonds over the 2-week period. And as I've stated, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to match that demand with the supply of the bonds themselves.
Mr. Speaker, a final supplementary. It's tough to have good news around here, isn't it, folks? Would the provincial treasurer suggest that due to the high level of interest with the capital bond issue that Albertans are showing...
Honourable member, would the member be kind enough to ask the question again? There's so much noise, the chair can't hear it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's not unusual, knowing where it's coming from. Mr. Speaker, would the provincial treasurer suggest that due to the high level of interest with the capital bond issue that Albertans are showing confidence in Alberta's economy and the economic future and the excellent financial management and fiscal policies of the government?
Mr. Speaker,
we've had a hypothetical, now a request for an opinion. Final supplementary, Calgary McCall.
Speaker,
No, he's had his, sorry, scorecard has run out on yourself. Leader of the Opposition, followed by Clover Bart, followed by Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, in principle, I support this, but it's rather easy to sell something when you're putting it a percentage point over other Treasury notes, and we've checked with investment community, so it's not surprising. My question is to the Minister, to the Treasurer. Why didn't you make it competitive around the 7.5 range that other Treasury bonds are being released at this particular time? Check with the investment community. That's what they're saying.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the question from the member from Norwood because it shows how little he knows about the financial markets. And can you imagine trusting this to someone like him to operate, Mr. Speaker? The misunderstanding, the misinformation from that Socialist Party across the way is outlandish, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and turning to the issue, Speaker, I should apologize for those pointed remarks. The advice we got from our advisors, Mr. Speaker, was that the bond issue was priced essentially perfect. Now, it could have been an eighth or a quarter higher. The 3-year money markets, Mr. Speaker, for Government of Alberta bonds and for Government of Canada bonds is approximately 9.4%. The guaranteed investment certificates of 1 year, Mr. Speaker, is trading approximately 8.2%. Canada Savings Bonds, the old traditional federal government favourite investment, is trading about 7.75%, Mr. Speaker, presumably because of the response we've had in the marketplace and the reaction we've had from the private sector investors, who are the experts, Mr. Speaker, that in fact the bond issue was priced absolutely perfectly, and it's been reinforced by the response of the people of Alberta, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the provincial treasurer now has had a run of the socialists. I'd like to know what has happened to the free enterprisers, because, Mr. Speaker, I want to know if the provincial treasurer has had an opportunity or has thought about what that has done to the private sector, because that's $275 million that's going into government, which is not available for private sector investment. What effect will that $275 million have on the small business sector in this province? Because those funds are not available for the sector anymore.
Mr. Speaker, there's no question that the $275 million, first of all, Mr. Speaker, will be used for capital projects in this province and the additional money as well, and therefore will go back into investment, Mr. Speaker, which is part of the economic growth formula, generating jobs, generating service sector opportunities. Mr. Speaker, that must be positive. And it isn't clear, Mr. Speaker, that in fact the money would have been used for other investment purposes. Now, it may have flown into other kinds of investment securities, but Mr. Speaker, it seems to me that it's better to have the money working for Albertans here in Alberta and having the interest going to Albertans as opposed to some other place, including central Canada or offshore Canada, Mr. Speaker. And that's the priority, and that's the reason it's working so well, Mr. Speaker.
Final supplementary, Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, to the Treasurer, could the Treasurer please inform the House why it was that he chose a non-Alberta-based firm to be the registrar of this bond issue rather than finding an Alberta-based firm to provide this service and therefore keep the jobs and the fees in Alberta to create economic development here?
Mr. Speaker, the problem we're facing with a variety of bond issues which the province brings forward, not just the Alberta capital bonds, but a variety of borrowings which we make right across all world markets, is to continue to rotate the leadership of the bond market. As the member knows, that's always a problem. What we have done, Mr. Speaker, is continue to rotate the leadership, the bond leadership. In this case, Mr. Speaker, however, we did pick a Western-based group, which is a unique one. There's not too many Western-based financial institutions which have the capacity to deal with this issue. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, the way in which the commission is paid is that it's an open commission to everyone who wants to participate. So really, although the Pemberton Securities did in fact lead the issue, essentially the entire financial institution in the province responded, and each one of those members and players in the financial institutions across this province,
including the banks, the credit unions, the trust companies, and the treasury branches, will all have an opportunity to take a small percentage of the sale of those bonds. So it isn't that it's uniquely controlled by one group, Mr. Speaker. There's an opportunity for everyone in the financial institution to respond, and that's essentially what's happened.
Member for Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back to the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care, who is so constantly preoccupied with the rising costs in health care and getting them under control. When in fact, I submit, in fact, it is the Treasurer who has caused the crisis in the revenue side, not the Albertans who are sick and need the system. I see that the Minister has finally taken up my suggestion about reinstituting the utilization committee to look at where the real abuse is in the system in terms of utilization. Will the Minister why did the Minister not resurrect this committee earlier to look at the utilization where it was misallocated? And now he's only bringing in it now after he spent $300,000 in PR campaigns and cutbacks on needed services for sick Albertans.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member may realize that what we're talking about is a new restructured utilization committee that has a somewhat different mandate than the previous utilization committee or the suggestion that was made in the utilization report. This particular committee will be zeroing in very specifically on medical tests and x-rays, which constitute a very rapidly and rising part of our health care budget. Sure, it could have been done earlier, but I was involved in discussions with the Alberta Medical Association and with hospitals and with others in the whole area of health care services and how we might limit the rapidly escalating costs. And it wasn't until recently that we came to a decision to restructure this committee and provide some new memberships. As a matter of fact, it's not quite been completed yet, but I hope within the next 2 or 3 weeks to have the committee working again. So it's a matter of it not having been done until now because we wanted to put some very careful thought into the whole matter before completing it.
Time for question period has expired. Might we complete this series of questions and in addition have one minister give supplementary answers to a May 15th issue that arose. Do we have unanimous consent? Opposed? Carried. Edmonton Centre, question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will this utilization committee also be monitoring the degree to which these ancillary services such as physios and chiropractors may well be upping their utilization because of the decrease in the fee that 12.5% that the ministers announced yesterday?
Mr. Speaker, the answer is no. The utilization committee that's referred to in my announcement of yesterday involves members of the staff department of hospitals and medical care and members appointed by the Alberta Medical Association, and I'm also hopeful of having an Alberta Hospital Association representative, and they will be looking specifically at areas involving medical practitioners, generally known as doctors or physicians, and they won't be involving themselves in the areas covered by other medical practitioners such as physiotherapists or chiropractors or podiatrists or dentists for that matter. I think that the real key to making some progress in the area of utilization committee is not to try to have a broad sweep with that committee, but rather try to zero in on some specific problems and see if we can come to a conclusion rather quickly as to how to reduce costs in certain areas.
Still a lot of turnstile medicine, Mr. Speaker, and I'm wondering then to what degree then the minister is finally going to begin to look at limiting the billing numbers of physicians in the province, which is one of the only ways to cap the level of service, to cap the utilization by limiting the billing numbers of physicians, which I see he says he may do. When is he going to do it and how?
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated yesterday, discussions are underway with the Alberta Medical Association and with the College of Physicians and Surgeons and other interested parties in terms of ways in which we might limit the growth in the number of physicians practicing in Alberta. It's a very complicated matter in that in recent years we've been increasing our physicians by in excess of 200 physicians per year. About 90 of those have been coming from outside of Canada. largely because we've had an inability to attract Canadian graduates to practice in rural areas. I understand the same situation exists in other provinces as well. So if we could find some way to get Canadian graduates to practice in smaller rural communities, then we could limit the numbers of doctors coming into Canada from outside the country, and that would alleviate, at least for the near term, the requirement to limit billing numbers in our province. So those are the kinds of things we're working on, and I want to have some very careful study of that before making recommendations as to what we should actually do.
So you limit the services Albertans can have, but not the number of physicians providing them. Everyone now agrees, of course, that preventive health care is one of the prime ways to reduce utilization of the medical care system. At what point will the minister spell out what is medically required preventative health care services provided by a physician?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member and his leader, both yesterday and today, have on occasions mistaken me for a medical doctor. It is not a responsibility of mine, or it's not my purpose, Mr. Speaker, to try to determine in every case what is medically required. I have said time and again in this legislature in reviewing a number of these matters that the decision with respect to certain procedures as to whether or not they are medically required very obviously has to rest with the medical doctor. Now, the Alberta Medical Association and people in the Department of Hospitals and Medical Care who are expert in the field of medicine are working together to try to provide some guidelines to the medical profession to assist them in making decisions with regard to what is medically required, but that is not an area where I intend, as Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care, to be making decisions in.
Member for Vermilion Viking.
Minister, would the minister consider a refundable charge on every visit, say of $20, to cut down the indiscriminate use of the medical system? I do believe this has been attempted in other areas of the world.
Well, Mr. Speaker, certainly over the coming years, I suppose we're going to have to consider various ways. I think there should be some incentives, indeed, for people to use the system appropriately, but what we have announced thus far in terms of the increases in the medical care premiums, together with the changes and modifications to the plan yesterday, is all that we intend to do in that area, with the exception of those items outlined in my news release of yesterday that involve limiting physician billing numbers, utilization, patient signing the bill, public awareness, and our ambulance review, which is ongoing. I think if we work in those areas and are effective, we can go a long way to reduce our overall cost. I just say in conclusion, though, it is a bit refreshing in the legislature during the question period to at least hear one suggestion for cost control rather than numerous complaints and no suggestions whatever from the opposition.
Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you. The minister mentioned that last year 90 out of 200 doctors came from out of the country. Why are we bringing in foreign doctors instead of making it possible for immigrant doctors from other countries who are already here to get accredited by ensuring they can get internships? This is a matter that I raised with the minister last year. He promised that he would look into it. Where are we in this situation if we're still bringing in 90 doctors from out of the country and these doctors can't get accredited?
Mr. Speaker, a very important question, and the answer is important too. It's simply this. There should be no way that the College of Physicians and Surgeons or those who are involved in licensing doctors to practice medicine in this province should take a different approach and a different standard, that obviously will be a lower standard, to license those who happen to arrive here as refugees, as opposed to those who may want to come to practice medicine and have the skills that are required by our licensing agency. I would not in any way advocate that they drop their standards simply because refugees have arrived in Alberta and claim to have medical professional ability that would allow them to practice medicine here. They must, in all cases, in my view, pass the appropriate examinations, and when they do that, they're treated equally as well as anyone else.
Minister of Consumer Corporate Affairs, with regard to question raised on May 15, page 1235 of Hansard.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. On that day in this House, the member for Edmonton Kingsway filed with the Assembly a memorandum dated April 27, 1987, which was marked confidential, addressed from the Regional Director of the Consumer and Corporate Affairs Regional Office in Edmonton to all staff. At that time, I hadn't seen the memorandum, and I simply said that once having seen it, I would find out the background and report back to the House, and that is what I have done. On the 12th of April in 1987, the Edmonton Regional Office was broken into, and some $2,000 was stolen from the safe. That $2,000 was money that belonged to our clients in the Family Financial Counseling Program, and also some money collected for licenses. It was decided on the advice of the police and the Security Division of Public Works not to replace the safe until an entire security audit and some recommendations had been made to secure the office generally. The police made a suggestion that it would be preferable to deposit the monies that are collected every day in a bank which is 1 1/2 blocks away from the office by way of a night deposit bag, and their recommendation also was that as many people as possible enter into the delivery system so that there would be no identifiable money couriers, but the rotation would be sufficient that no one watching the office on a regular basis could identify any one person and therefore increase the risk for that courier. On the 27th of April, this memorandum was written and it was delivered to staff in the regional office, all of whom had received it by 3 p.m. April the 28th, 1987. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, I am advised that several employees had expressed their concerns and their desire not to participate in the rotation. At 8:30 a.m. on April the 29th, a memorandum, a copy of which I have, but do not intend to file with the office, with the Assembly. The earlier memorandum was rescinded. 5 employees have volunteered to rotate, to carry the money 1 1/2 blocks to the bank, taking on this duty every evening in rotation. I am advised also that the government routinely has insurance coverage which extends to money and securities in the care of departmental employees. This includes the storage, handling, and transportation of money and securities, and if there is a loss from the actual destruction, disappearance, or wrongful abstraction of money and securities in or outside of the premises of the department, then that is all covered by the insurance of the government. The employee does not have to pay or make good any of the losses unless, of course, it is the wrongful action of the employee, him or herself. Mr. Speaker, there's one other thing I would like to mention, and that is this. This Legislative Assembly gives over $500,000 in research funds every year to the caucus of the NDP. And I would greatly appreciate it if they would do complete research and not mislead or leave wrong impressions in the public mind.
Member for Edmonton Kingsway, brief response.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was aware of the second memo, but since the minister was not aware of the first one, it seemed unnecessary to state so. That was the subsequent question, which I would have asked had it made any sense, but the minister didn't know what the hell was going on in her own department.
Order. Sorry, that language is not acceptable in the House, honourable member. And the purpose of the opportunity for the member to respond is to ask a brief supplementary question, and that's it. Please.
I apologize for that term, Mr. Speaker. And my question is,
will these people that are now carrying the funds be bonded?
As mentioned, Mr. Speaker, a moment ago, there is an insurance coverage carried by the government which extends to money and securities in the care of departmental employees.
Before the chair calls orders of the day, the chair would point out that the last number of days, some of the answers in particular have been touched long. Granted that some of the issues raised, especially with regard to hospitals and medical care, need longer time in order to respond. Nevertheless, there's still a tendency in the House for the questions, especially the supplementaries, to be indeed too long. Supplementary questions are not here for comment and then going on to the question, but rather just to ask the question. Chair recognizes the growing sense of frustration of some members in all quarters of the House. For the second day in a row, we now have 5 or 6 members left waiting in the wings, and I'm sure that the House will listen attentively and try to pick up the pace a touch in the days that lie ahead. In God we trust. The orders of the day, and might we revert to introduction of